Okay. All right, here we go. I am Lynne Cripe, CEO of the KonTerra Group. KonTerra provides mental health and resilience services to organizations working in high stress and high stakes environments. And our clients include international humanitarian organizations, technology companies, human rights defenders, and legal service organizations. And I'm so excited today to be joined by Judy Greenberg, a longtime KonTerra colleague who is a licensed psychologist. And we're going to have a conversation together. And Judy, I'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm Judy Greenberg. As Lynn said, I'm a licensed psychologist. And since about 25 years, I have been specializing in psychological trauma. I started working with KonTerra about 10 years ago and had the opportunity to provide services for U.S. aid all around the world after critical incidents or disasters or crises of all sorts, and support the employees, the family members, and the senior leadership, helping them understand how trauma impacts us and how they can support their staff in working towards healing, and supporting all the staff and their family members directly, both in groups and individually. So I'm delighted to be here and talk about trauma.
Well, and you're exactly the right person, Judy, for this conversation, because June 27th is PTSD Screening Day. We're actually recording this on June 25th. A couple of days in advance, because we wanted to share this conversation on June 27th, and we just wanted to have some dialogue around trauma and PTSD and the value of being screened for PTSD and what we can do to reduce stigma around PTSD and other mental health concerns. So with that, Judy, would love to dive in and hear some thoughts from you about trauma and the signs of trauma and PTSD. And you and I both know from our work that many humanitarian aid workers face trauma and traumatic experiences in their work, but may not always recognize how trauma shows up, and more specifically, how PTSD might show up. And so can you talk about that a little bit? What might people pay attention to, and why is it important for people, for aid workers in particular, to be screened, even if they don't feel like they've been affected by trauma that they have witnessed or experienced?
I think that's a great question. If you're in the humanitarian aid field or the development field or so many other fields, if you work with refugees, with asylum seekers, with undocumented folks, you are working with trauma impacted populations. And what we know about our neurobiology is that that has a direct impact on us. Also, we experience trauma. I think we used to say that trauma was a very abnormal experience, but now we kind of recognize that most people don't get through their lives without being exposed to some level of traumatic experience. So it's important to remember that trauma is an experience more than an event. It's the neurobiological response to events. And human beings are wired to heal, both in our physical health and in our emotional health. So for most folks, well, for many folks, if you have the experience of trauma and you have time to recover and you have the support to recover, you'll be able to do that just perfectly well on your own. But I think what I've learned over the years of working with humanitarian aid workers and other people who bring a real passion to their work is that we don't take that time to recover. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is the impact accumulates, and it builds up and builds up until people then start noticing some negative impact is going on with their with their cognitive ability, with their interactions, their social interactions, with their physical health, right? So those would be some of the first signs that you've experienced trauma that has not had the time to heal. You haven't been able to process it. And so there's a whole range of things that people might start noticing. And I want to just say that those are normal responses to the experience of being exposed to trauma, whether it's happened to you directly or secondarily through your work hearing stories of human suffering, right? So either way has the same accumulative impact on us and starts after a while if we don't have the time. And Lynn, I hear over and over, one of the things that I hear over and over with humanitarian aid workers is, I was sent to Ukraine. I worked there for 2 years. And then without any time in between, I went to Syria and I worked there for 2 years. And then I had a 6-month posting in South Sudan. And then I went directly ... And so you hear no time in between. And I always ask people, how much time in between did you take? And it's always 0. Maybe it's a week, to pack and unpack. Not nearly enough time for us to recover and get back to a good baseline.
Yeah, that is such a common professional experience, isn't it, for aid workers or for people in other kinds of high stress, high stakes professions, where it's this accumulation of experiences and exposure that is accruing because of their job, because of their professional experience. And I loved what you said about humans are really wired to recover and wired to heal. And that is a very hopeful message in the midst of a conversation that can feel heavy. As we're thinking about the kinds of exposure to traumatic material or traumatic experiences that people may have in the course of their profession. But for me, I'm sort of holding on to that idea that we are really wired to recover.
We are. And I find it so exciting. We're learning so much all the time about how our neurobiology works. So much more information is coming up, and I feel really committed to sharing that. Like, every human being should have the owner's manual of what having this central nervous system and brain means for healing, what's going on, so that, again, this is a normal wired in neurobiological response. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of some personality flaw that you can't hack it. It's hardwired into us. This is what happens. Just like it's hardwired into your phone that if you don't plug it in every now and then, it stops working the way you want it to. And people will start noticing, I'm feeling angry all the time, or I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to have my office door closed. I read a document on my computer and I don't take in the information. I can't remember it. So they start noticing systems breaking down. I get sick all the time. I've been in Kenya and I was there for 2 years and now I'm getting sick all the time. Or I'm fighting with my partner or my family, right? All these systems start breaking down because we're not paying attention to what's going on and what's required to get better.
Yeah. And I'm really struck, Judy, by what you're saying about what we have learned and what we're continuing to learn about the neurobiology of trauma and the response to traumatic events. And that analogy with our phones is so perfect, because we don't judge our phone for needing to be plugged in. And yet there is still often so much stigma particularly among sort of high achieving, mission-driven professionals who are in high stakes professions like humanitarian aid work or legal services or trust and safety functions. So given sort of the people that you have worked with over the course of your career, what are your thoughts about what we can do to reduce the stigma around talking about these things, around seeking help? What are some things that you've seen have worked?
I think that's a great question, Lynn, and I love to ask that question in any country you go to, because again, we all have the same neurobiology. We all have the same autonomic nervous system, and that's what drives us. So we like to think our brain is the boss of us, and especially, again, like you said, people who work with their brain and do a lot of analyzing and thinking and planning and organizing and collaborating. And we're also human animals. And I always tell my clients, if there's an argument between your brain and your body is 100% of the time going to win. If you think about the nights when you're trying to fall asleep and your brain is going 100 miles an hour over worries and concerns and anxieties, you can try and think yourself to go to sleep. It never works. What works is, again, going right to the central nervous system. If we calm our body down and get that to a neutral place, it's connected to our brain. They're constantly communicating. And that's how we can fall asleep, for example. So I always say we start with this state. That's our central nervous system state. And then we make a story. So it's state first, story next. And that, I think, when we can share some psychoeducation about how our neurobiology works in regards to trauma and healing, I think that in and of itself, Lynn, often really melts away a lot of the stigma, because people learn that fight, flight, or freeze response. They don't have a lot of choice about it. That little old reptilian old part of our brain back there is sending off the alarm. And sometimes we know why, sometimes we don't. If you have a trauma history that's extensive, if you've been in the field for a long time, whether it's as a immigration lawyer or a humanitarian aid worker, that's going to get set off frequently, right? It's going to be always trying to keep us safe. So as soon as we kind of know the infrastructure of how it works, I think it takes away a lot of the blame. You'd have to be someone who meditates 3 hours a day for 40 years to really slow down our fight, flight, freeze automatic response, right? So what we can encourage people to do is, help them understand, again, the owner's manual, and then help people learn how to regain a sense of calm after that response has been activated.
Yeah. And I so appreciate what you're saying, Judy, and appreciate your use of the word blame a moment ago, because what I'm hearing you say is that if we can sort of detach or separate our understanding of our the wiring, and this is all designed to keep us safe and to protect us, but sometimes that happens in ways that don't really serve us in the long term or in the modern world, and separate that from our sort of judgment or assessment of ourselves as human beings, our character, our worth, then that takes the blame out of the out of the equation, and the role that educating ourselves, educating each other about that common trauma response is helpful in making that distinction. And setting aside the blame. There's enough people out there that will blame us for all kinds of things. We don't need to blame ourselves for things that are very human, common responses.
Right. And not only common, but it's kind of an exquisitely designed system that we have these senses that are constantly bringing in bits of information about whether we're safe or not safe.
Yeah.
And then if we perceive a threat, whether it's real or not real, we automatically go into a mode of protection for survival, for safety. So again, that's a way to really kind of appreciate when you notice things going on with you, as the goal is to take good care of you and keep you safe and help you survive. It's not a sign of weakness or that you don't have what it takes, to hack that kind of work. It's a sign that you're actually a human being and that your systems are working exactly the way they're designed to work.
Yeah, that's such a powerful message to I think anchor us. That it doesn't mean that we can't continue in this profession that we might love, but that we're having some of these experiences, is that as humans we're actually functioning the way that we're meant to be, but there may be some additional skills, techniques, support that can help us thrive in the midst of working in these kinds of high stress environments or demanding professions. And we can still have some resistance or some hesitancy to seek support if we're noticing that we might be having some of these kinds of responses and maybe struggling to manage those responses on our own. And so I know that you have had many, many conversations and provided support to many people over the course of your career who have had that kind of hesitancy to seek support, particularly if they have some fear that it could affect their career or their reputation. So what would you say to somebody right now? There might be somebody who's listening to this who says, well, Judy, that all sounds great, but I'm concerned that if somebody finds out that I've sought some additional support, that I've gotten therapy, that I've talked to a counselor, that could have blowback for me. What would you say to them right now?
Two things. One is, I think that was a lot more true many years ago than it is now. And I think many organizations are now seeing things with a little more perception and insight, that if you're someone who seeks out support because things aren't working well for you, you're going to learn some rock solid strategies that you can incorporate and have in your tool belt that will help you no matter where you end up working. So, in fact, I think the old way of thinking was that if your higher ups, or if that there would be some negative impact on a security clearance or something like that if it was made obvious that you had sought out mental health support. Now people are seeing that as an asset. That means you had the good sense to notice, I'm not operating at 100%. I need some support, and I'm going to learn, in getting that support, I'm going to learn how to deal with the challenges that I face in my work in a good way. So it really makes you stronger in that way than people who are kind of trying to hide it and not show it and just ignore it and make it disappear. So that's one thing. The other thing I think of really clearly is that I think this is also a management issue. When management and leadership model, first of all, talking about and normalizing that the work we do, that we put our heart and soul and bodies, for many people, on the line, it has an impact on us. And some of those impacts are beautiful and soul inspiring and wonderful, and some of them are negative. And so for management to, first of all, normalize that the work we do has a both negative and positive impact on us. And that if you're noticing any signs of negative impact, please get support. And I do that. If the manager says, here's what I do, here's the KonTerra number, right? If you're a KonTerra client, here's the number to reach out and get support. I've used them. I found it really helpful. I had my teenage daughter and son use them also. That really helped them a lot. And, you know, I'm happy to talk about my experience with any of you to help normalize that. You know, just like if you had broken your leg, I would highly recommend you get it set by a doctor so that it can fully heal, right?
Yeah, we would never suggest that somebody set their own leg, and just sort of cope with that. And particularly if that accident, right, the reason that they broke their leg was on the job, we would insist that they go get appropriate health care. And so I really, you're highlighting the organizational responsibility when people have occupational exposure to traumatic experiences, that the organization has a responsibility to them, and the very powerful role that a leader can play in creating a permission structure for us to be more honest and forthright, and even set the expectation that in this organization, this is what we do, and that I do it for myself.
We take care of the people who are doing the work.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I love that, and so we have sort of hit on a number of important things in this brief conversation. I'm sure that we could talk for many hours more about trauma. But for me, a couple of things that I'm taking away from this conversation, Judy, is the importance of us really reading our owner's manual and understanding what are common human responses when we encounter events and experiences that are distressing, that are frightening, where we might be at risk, and so that we can be better at recognizing that in ourselves and also in other people. I am going to hold on to that idea that we're also wired to recover. And the hope that really encapsulates that idea. And then for me, another key takeaway from this conversation is about that organizational responsibility and leadership opportunity that organizations and leaders have to set expectations and to model how we take care of ourselves, how we take care of each other when we're in high stakes professions where there may be heightened exposure to these kinds of risks. Yeah. For you, are there any key takeaways from the conversation?
I think just really kind of sharing that knowledge is important to me to empower other people. And also the other part I think that I really want to stress is the sharing experiences really helps normalize it and reduce the stigma. Just in hearing your colleagues say, yeah, that was really rough, whatever we just went through, or what we're going through. This is really hard, you know, and I find myself ... right? Just not trying to make it into group therapy or anything like that, but just normalizing that we're human beings while we're doing this work. We don't separate it out. And part of being a human being is that one of the ways we heal is in connection with other people, with our colleagues.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Judy, and such a lovely note to conclude on, because one of the things that we know also about traumatic experiences is that they can disrupt relationship, and they can be they can leave people feeling isolated and somehow separate from people that they care about. And that reminder of, oh yeah, other people feel the same way, and the healing that can come just from knowing that you aren't alone in this experience is very, very powerful. I know I have seen that in all kinds of ways over the course of my career, the power in knowing that you aren't alone.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Judy, thank you so much for having this conversation today. I really appreciate it. And you made reference a few moments ago to a leader referring people to KonTerra if they're a KonTerra client. And if anybody is watching this and you're thinking, I might want to talk to somebody further about this, feel free to get in touch with us, either for yourself or your organization. You can reach us at info@konterragroup.net. We'll put that information in the notes below this video. So thanks for joining us today, Judy. Thanks for having this conversation.
Thank you, Lynn. It was great talking with you.
Yeah. Take care.